So far away, Brad, have you watched Citizen Kane?
Yes, I have.
What do you think of it?
Uh,
Let's think, what do you say about Citizen Kane? It's Citizen Kane! There's not much I can say about Citizen Kane that hasn't already been said before, so rather than go through the usual rigmarole of washing Orson Welles' balls, I'm just going to say it's a pretty good film, and you should probably watch it if you've got any interest whatsoever in film history or anything like that. So, moving on from, the requisite ball washing, it's time to talk about how Citizen Kane, due to budget cuts, might be set in a world filled with dinosaurs. And this video actually combines two of my favourite things, which is fun facts about films and dinosaurs. And do you have a favourite dinosaur, Brad?
Ooh, a favourite dinosaur?
That's the thing, everyone's got a favourite dinosaur, but there's that viral tweet that goes around of, I think it was someone famous as well, of why does no one ever ask me what my favourite dinosaur is? Being an adult sucks.
The one that I always remember is the Pachycephalosaur.
Pachycephalosaurus, meaning thick-headed lizard, is a bipedal ornithischian dinosaur. The thick skull dome of this species has given rise to the hypothesis that they used their skulls during intraspecies combat.
Fair enough, well mine is the Ankylosaurus, because I just always thought all the other dinosaurs got too much play. Tyrannosaurus Rex, the Tyrannosaurus Rex is the fucking Charizard of the dinosaur world, where everybody likes it, so therefore it's not cool anymore. The Stegosaurus gets, again, too much play, and the Triceratops is too edgy. It's the Ankylosaurus. Ankylosaurus just it's just there, just cruising, doing its own thing. It's my kind of dinosaur.
I'm built like a tank, cause I'm an Ankylosaurus. I weigh 4 tons, so you know I don't run.
Let us know your favourite dinosaur in the comments below. And if it's not an Ankylosaurus, explain why you're wrong. But in regards to Citizen Kane, there's not really much to say about it. I'm guessing, like myself, Brad, you watched it when you were in university, doing film.
No, actually.
Okay.
I only watched it recently with my mum because we'd both never seen it.
Oh, okay. And what do you think of it? And you can be honest, Brad, it's boring as fuck, innit?
Yeah, whenever anyone talks about it, I always try and come to it from a filmmaker standpoint.
Yes.
And I know it was revolutionary.
And here's the thing, yeah. I think Citizen Kane is boring as fuck, but I also think it's one of the most revolutionary, groundbreaking films of all time. I am able to have both of those thoughts in mind because I have something known as media literacy. And while I think Citizen Kane is boring as fuck, I'm aware of the fact, due to having media literacy, that is because I'm looking at it from a modern perspective. And if you look at Citizen Kane from the perspective of someone back then, it was, as mentioned, revolutionary. And I believe the quote that I heard when I was in university, studying it, is, it was the first movie that was filmed like a movie. So it contains a lot of shots and things that would be commonplace in cinema today that were completely unheard of at the time.
In Kane, there were these technical advances which everybody's talked about until they're blue in the face. And they, I think, if you see Kane again today, you can see have been largely digested by the film industry. I mean, you see the ceilings are now in the shots, the lighting of Kane is now in all kinds of films.
Because most films back then were filmed like plays. So just just medium shot from middle distance with all characters on screen at the same time. Orson Welles came and went, no, fuck that noise. This isn't a play, this is a new medium, let's take advantage of the things this new medium can do. And as a result, created a bunch of stuff that ended up becoming commonplace in cinema today, to the point where you can watch Citizen Kane well, this is boring, what's so good about this? It just looks like a movie. It's that's the point! Nothing looked like this before Citizen Kane. And one of the things that I hate when it comes to discussions of older films like Citizen Kane is that the approach to it is so binary, where the people who think it's a masterpiece that can't be touched and the people who think it's boring because it's old cannot interact whatsoever, and it makes discussions of it kind of boring.
You get the same discourse around old visual effects films as well. If you think about the 1933 King Kong or any of the Harryhausen stuff.
Yeah, Ray Harryhausen stuff
people always criticise those as being, they're old, I can't watch them because they don't look real. They can't
but then
appreciate.
At the same time, people who are fans of them are well, you can't criticise that. You have to understand, what it was revolutionary for the time. And it's like, in both groups are correct, but neither of them are willing to look at it from the perspective of the other one. I'm like, yes, they were revolutionary for the time, but you have to acknowledge that. To a modern eye, they look bad. And it's like, it's on you as a fan of this to explain why they were so revolutionary. It's one thing to say it was revolutionary. It's another thing to explain why, and that's like with Citizen Kane that happened to me a lot of. I always heard it's one of the best films ever made, it's so good, and no one ever told me why.
Citizen Kane is the most important, greatest American film as far as I'm concerned.
This is the gold standard here.
It's pretty hard to top Citizen Kane.
Citizen Kane is the greatest movie ever made.
It is just one of the great movies ever made, and I think many people are going to agree. It's just one of the great American experiences.
And so my media teacher broke down. It was the first movie that was filmed like a movie. And like, as soon as I heard that, I was like, that's it. It clicked. And I went, no one had ever said that before. No one was ever willing to, like, actually have that discussion, because they were approaching it as if we were all on the same page of it's a masterpiece, it's phenomenal. And they were expecting me to just believe that second one without ever having watched it, without any of the context they have of like their 20 years studying. It's just a personal bugbear of mine that people don't take the time to explain that sort of thing.
There's a lot of groundbreaking movies that, as themselves, as movies, are terrible. And when you hear, like, there's a fact behind the scenes, it's the first movie to have done this. You're like, really? That one?
Yeah, it's like, what is it, like Lawnmower Man? Like the first, like, fully CGI character in a movie, and you look at it and it looks like wank. You go forward a couple of years, you get like the T-1000, like the T-Rex from Jurassic Park. Like, as bad as it looks to a modern eye, it cannot be, like, understated, or I always get these mixed understated or overstated, how impactful that was at the time. Anyway, in regards to Citizen Kane, widely considered Orson Welles' magnum opus, he was given an unprecedented amount of control and say over how the movie would look and be presented to an audience. Are you aware of, like, how much control he had over the final product?
No, not really.
Now, he was given what's known as final cut privilege, which meant that absolutely nobody in the studio could override him on what the final version of the film would look like, and he had absolute creative control over the entire editing process. Not that really mattered, because he also wrote, directed, and starred in the goddamn thing, but it was a nice gesture nonetheless.
I think studios need to realise more often that if you give a talented creative the full control, you get a good product. Like, studio meddling has ruined so many things.
But also, I see it from the other perspective of, there are so many times where a creative has been given absolute creative control over something, and they've had to course correct the fuck out of that. Zack Snyder.
Yeah, fair enough.
So, the guy had a vision, it was just a shit one.
This been announced like today or yesterday that Henry
Superman's not
Cavill
coming
isn't
back.
coming back. After all that hype surrounding Black Adam.
I laughed so hard when I read that.
They just know the Snyderverse fans whining about Zack's vision not being completed.
You know what? Fuck you. Anyway, so bringing it back to Citizen Kane once again. Even though Orson Welles had complete creative control over the project, there's a couple of things that he had to stick to, such as the film's budget, which, even though I've got it here now, $500,000, which doesn't sound like a lot today, was a lot back then. Still, the scope of the film was so broad and so out there that it was feared that there's no way Welles can make the film he wants on this budget. For example, Welles was keenly aware that the film's News on the March segment was so costly to film, there was no way he was going to get greenlit by the studio.
News on the March!
So when studio execs came in to the production lot to see what he was up to, when they saw that, like, what the fuck's this? Orson Welles, and I shit you not, Brad, told them that it was test footage they weren't going to do anything with, and then did card tricks until they left. It's like, what a fucking don! Can you hear that? It was like
I
the
can hear a
police
siren,
are
yeah.
outside my house right now.
What have you done?
I don't know. They heard me talking shit about Zack Snyder's Justice League, like none of that. I hope it doesn't show up at exactly. I can hear it, but my microphone can't. Anyway, as talented as Orson Welles was, even he couldn't stretch the budget that far, which is why the film contains dinosaurs.
Yeah, I've been waiting the entire recording to find out why dinosaurs are apparently in Citizen Kane, which, as far as I'm aware, is quite a grounded movie.
There's no. That's the thing. It's a bit larger than life. Some of the characters in there are very theatrical, and I think as well for the people out there maybe not film buffs, but buffs on more modern pop culture. Citizen Kane is regarded as the Simpsons' most popular parody target. And there is a quote from someone who worked on The Simpsons back in the day of we think we've parodied Citizen Kane enough where if you put all those clips together, you could basically make the entire movie.
I want my Eddie.
And it baffles me that they've not done that.
I don't get why they don't just make a Simpsons version of Citizen Kane by this point, then.
I don't know why they don't just do Simpsons versions of everything. Do you like when Family Guy did Blue Harvest and they did Star Wars?
Yeah.
And then Simpsons do Treehouse of Horror and they try and parody an entire movie in 10 minutes, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. I never understood why they don't just get the full budget to just just parody movies using Simpsons characters. You're clearly good at that. Do that.
I mean, anything would be better than what they're doing now.
Yeah, and especially do it while Maurice LaMarche is still alive. Or Maurice LaMarche, I'm not sure how I pronounce his name, but he's the guy who does the voice of the Brain in Pinky and the Brain. And basically, the Brain is just him doing an impression of Orson Welles.
You can't emphasize beef. That's like his wanting me to emphasize in before July. Come on, fellas, you're losing your heads. I wouldn't direct any living actor like this in Shakespeare.
You can't emphasize beef. That's like wanting me to emphasize in before July. Come on, fellas, you're losing your heads.
Sorry.
I wouldn't direct any living actor like this in Shakespeare the way you do this. It's impossible.
I appreciate these extra little facts, Karl, but dinosaurs, please.
Yes, dinosaurs. Okay. So, for example, there are a couple of scenes in Citizen Kane where they had to dramatically scale back what was envisioned via some pretty creative measures. For example, the iconic scene of this big crowd. You see them all cheering, you can hear cheering noises, and everyone in the crowd's losing their shit.
Yeah.
That's not a crowd shot. That is, I'm not making this up, that is a cardboard set with earbuds.
Yeah.
Earbuds being shaken from side to side with a torch behind them.
Machine, now in complete control of the government of the state. I made no campaign promises.
Yeah, and that's the thing, it looks like a crowd, and it's only for one shot. That's the thing, it's for one shot. It'd be way too costly to get that many extras into one scene, so you film it, in a creative way to hide the limitations of what's there, and you create this incredibly cheap special effect that's, still holds up today. It's when I point that out to people, and they go back and they look at that scene no, and then you go and you look real close. Oh, it's not people, they are, it's just little cotton buds waving. Same thing with Star Wars. You fast forward 70 years, Phantom Menace, do you know the crowd shots for the pod racing?
Yeah.
Same thing. That's how they did that in there.
Really?
Yeah, it's the same trick. Because your eye expects to see a crowd.
Yeah, and I guess it's not usually the subject either, is it? You're looking past that.
Yeah, because your eyes see what they want to see and fill in the blanks for you. And you get the same thing, I think it's the film The Goon, with Sean William Scott. They couldn't get enough extras for crowd scenes, so they just got cardboard cutouts.
That's as classic.
And again, you don't notice it until someone like me points it out, and then you go back and it ruins the film. Or in my case, it makes it better. Because I love when you look out for shit like that.
Dinosaur.
Okay, so there is a moment in the film as ostensibly set amongst a grove of trees, and Wells was well aware that filming on location or creating a set for that would be very costly. So, in typical Orson Welles fashion, he decided to edit around that using creative camera tricks and, created what would be a pretty normal shot today, which is the establishing shot, which is some cars driving on a beach to the grove, and then it fades into the scene itself, and your mind puts those two things together. So you see cars driving towards this grove of trees, it cuts to a scene of some people surrounded by trees, your mind puts those things together. And that's a pretty boring, normal shot from a movie, but for the time, no one thought of that, and Orson Welles was like, let's do it.
Yeah, I guess if they were basing it on plays, you don't really have establishing shots,
no.
do you?
Yeah, and so using those two things, Orson Welles will be able to create the illusion of a swanky-ass party in a swamp. And you probably know where this is going, Brad. Like, how do you, when you're making a film, create, background scenes and stuff like that? There's a couple of ways you can do that, isn't there?
Yeah, it depends how realistic or complicated you want it to be, but you can use matte paintings, you could use old footage and just put it into the background.
Yes, and what do you think Orson Welles used?
I'm going to guess.
He wanted there to be movement.
I'm going to guess some old footage.
Yes, it's a pretty common technique known as rear projection, where it's just you put footage behind people. It's most often visible when you're watching people drive cars, and it's one of those things where every time I see it, I laugh. Because it's never done right.
Movies used the process constantly for driving scenes because it made it so easy to record dialogue while outside or moving in a car, especially film noirs.
Now, do you know when people are driving a car and they get the rear projection, they get the aspect ratio wrong, so it makes the car look really small?
And then the bit where they all have to turn.
Yeah, or the actor doesn't know what they're doing, so they're wildly swinging as the car just drives normally.
It's like Star Trek, and those shows are really bad for that, aren't they?
Yeah. It's like, oh no, you've been hit by a photon torpedo. And none of the actors are responding in the same way. But Orson Welles, very cleverly used rear projection alongside actual physical tree props. Here's the problem though, Brad. Do you want to hazard a guess at what film he took the jungle footage from?
Oh,
you mentioned it earlier in this video.
King Kong, 1933.
Not King Kong.
Not King
reportedly,
Kong.
Son of Kong.
Right.
This has never been confirmed because Orson Welles wasn't all too keen on talking about the limitations and budgetary constraints of his most famous work. However, there is a long-standing and pretty credible rumour that they used B-roll from Son of Kong. And Son of Kong is a film which has a jungle in it, but that jungle is full of fucking dinosaurs. So, you have the original article in front of you now, Brad, yes?
Yes.
Yes, so scroll down to the bottom GIF. And just, you tell me if that's not a fucking dinosaur.
That's some very big birds, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, so, there have been people out there who said, no, it's a bird. Fuck you, that's a dinosaur. That's not, but you can see it's so obvious like a pterodon or one of those little flappy dinosaurs. It's so obviously one of those. Does that detract from the fact Citizen Kane, one of the greatest movies ever made? No, but it does add a whole new layer to the film itself when you realise that it's entirely possible that just off frame, there are some fucking dinosaurs. You gotta say, I'm looking at it, it's so obviously a dinosaur. I can see it. It's a dinosaur. It's a fucking dinosaur.
They need to do a sequel that is just about the dinosaur world.
Maybe that's why Citizen Kane. That's why he's so mad, isn't it? He's mad at the dinosaurs.
Rosebud was the name of his pet dinosaur.
So far away, Brad, most of this video we've spent talking about Citizen Kane and the fact that it's a very, very good film, but it may not necessarily hold up when viewed with a modern eye. So let's shit on some other classics of cinema now. And is there any other old classic films that you simply don't like? And to say you don't like it doesn't mean you can't appreciate, what it did for cinema, its impact, what it did for the industry as a whole. It just means that you personally don't like it. And I'm going to say Sound of Music. I don't like the Sound of Music. I just don't think it's as good as when in my head, Sound of Music occupies the same place as Mary Poppins and Wizard of Oz.
I think they say Bedknobs and Broomsticks.
No, Wizard of Oz, two old classic movies that are musicals that you watch around Christmas, and I vastly prefer both of those movies to The Sound of Music. I can appreciate it and how popular it was and how much it did cinema. I just don't like it.
I mean, a lot of people are going to hate me for this, and I think particularly Lucas might give me a call after he watches this, but some of the Disney classics are pretty shit.
Oh man, I hate Cinderella.
The Snow White.
Cinderella's so fucking boring.
Snow White is also sort of goes along. It's not really maybe it's because I've seen the story too much.
Yeah, as well because it is a pretty basic, just direct translation of the original fairy tale, whereas like later Disney things like embellish and add to those stories in some way, which is that the whole point of like looking at it with a modern eye. It's like you go back and you watch like the first Iron Man movie, even that's what 20 years old now. Even that seems quite quaint compared to the shit Tony Stark's doing in like Endgame.
It's I think it's 14 or 15 years because 20 years makes me sound so old.
No, it's getting close to 20 years now.
Yeah,
It's just one of those things like, and having the ability to look at something with both the modern eye and then from the perspective of like the people back then, I think is very important and not very common skill that people seem to have, especially online. And the amount of like discourse online about just even movies from like the 90s and stuff, even stuff that came out like 10 years ago. It's like every time they release like a new games console, the amount of people who are like, oh no, I don't know how people like made do with last gen. It's like last gen looks fine.
There's a tweet I saw recently where someone's where it was a response to somebody complaining about going back and playing old games and be like, you can't play old games anymore because they just don't control properly and they don't feel right, and I'm so used to this modern stuff. It's like,
you know what that is? That's your problem. But we all know the only thing that really deserves that 10 out of 10 is Paddington 2.
Yes.
Paddington 2!
Have you seen...
someone went back and gave it a bad review to be a dick.
No, the film with Nick Cage, where he plays Nick Cage.
Oh, he fights a bear.
Does he fight a bear? I watched it recently, I don't remember him fighting a bear.
Was it the weight of
the way of,
massive talent? Yeah, that film's great, yeah.
It's in that. Paddington 2 is a big plot point.
I don't remember that.
It's because...
I think I watched it on a plane, so maybe I don't recall the exact point. But I remember, just like Paddington 2 came out with like perfect 10 on 10 reviews for everyone. And that's the thing as well. I think people get confused about what a 10 out of 10 means. And it's like Rotten Tomatoes is like, I hate Rotten Tomatoes so much because when people see that Rotten Tomatoes is obviously 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, that doesn't mean it is a flawless masterpiece. That means that 100% of the reviewers think it's worth a watch.
Yeah.
And that can be anywhere. And the thing is, you can say something's worth a watch and still rate it a 3 out of 10 if you think it has value in some other sense. Like, say, it's like the last film in which someone appears, or it introduces a revolutionary new filmmaking technique, or contains some, or a viewpoint that is otherwise not represented in film, but is otherwise handled poorly from a technical standpoint. People just see 100%. That must mean everyone. Like, how can it be 100%? I thought it sucked. It's like, but you still watched it.
Parasite was a film that was, praised all over the place.
That broke so many fucking reviewers.
Won Oscars and shit. Like, I watched Parasite. I didn't really like the third act. And I mentioned to somebody, I was like, personally, I didn't really like the way it ended. I thought the third act was a bit weak. And they had a massive go at me. And were like, you can't say that. You can't say it like, it's this, it's that. And I was like, well, objectively, maybe I'm wrong.
Personal opinion.
Yeah, I was like, maybe I'm wrong in terms of like actual cinema. Like, obviously, enough people have reviewed it that my opinion probably isn't the correct one, but it's still my opinion. And I can not like it if I don't like it.
Then you're entitled to it, yeah. And that's just one of those things that always frustrates me. People don't understand that. Like, it doesn't mean it's perfect. It means that 100% of the reviewers so far think it's worth a watch. And worth a watch is a very subjective standpoint.
Is there any piece of media that you think is an actual 0 out of 10?
I don't think there's anything, because to say it's a 0 out of 10 means it has literally no value. And I think all media has value, but the value that it has might not be the value that the original creator intended. Like, everything has value, even if it's just to show what you don't do. It's like the whole thing of, getting your... It's those movies that are, 1s and 0s out of 10 are widely considered to be. I think they are the cinematic equivalent of those warning labels that tell you not to get your dick stuck in your zipper. Of, someone had to make that mistake for that warning label to exist, and the person who made that mistake probably thought the experience sucked, but ultimately... that experience did have value because it warns other people against doing that. And that's what those movies exist as. Just warning labels for future filmmakers and creators of just don't do this.
You heard it here first. The guy who first ate the silica gel had value.
Yeah. He does, yeah. Maybe not to him, but, to culture as a whole.